Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Vanessa McCausland is the author of The Lost Summers of Driftwood, a stunning debut novel published by HarperCollins earlier this year. As I've said many times in the past, the calibre of debut Aussie fiction at the moment is overwhelmingly high, and Vanessa's novel is a shining example of this current phenomenon. For me, part of the joy of discovering new Australian authors, particularly debut authors, is that sense of not knowing what to expect, of finding a unique style of storytelling or an unforgettable character or setting that stays with you long after the story ends. I didn't know when I picked up The Lost Summers of Driftwood that I would ache with longing to find a place that may or may not exist, but which held memories both good and bad for Phoebe, the main character in this hauntingly beautiful tale. A place that harks back to a simpler existence and which ultimately helps to heal Phoebe's fractured heart. I didn't know when I opened the pages of this book that I would smell the eucalyptus leaves of the gum trees bordering the river, or feel the heat blistering the splintered planks of the old jetty, smell the salt and hear the kookaburras laughing in the trees. But what I do know is that Vanessa McCausland is a born storyteller and a very welcome addition to the Australian publishing scene. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Vanessa to the podcast today. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Claudine. Oh, thank you for such a beautiful introduction.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's so well deserved. I felt so nostalgic reading your book. It was as if I could remember long, lazy summer days spent by the beach, days when we would come home with salt-stiffened hair, stinging with sunburn. Yet I never visited the South Coast until I was an adult, and I think you captured the essence of Australian summers so beautifully in this book. So I wanted to ask you, is that what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, I think so. The book is actually set in a real place. The jetty and Driftwood, the old house that it's set at, is actually on the New South Wales South Coast on a river that my family visited over my whole lifetime, really. I guess I really wanted to capture the feeling that I've always had about this place. It's 5 hours south of Sydney, and my family used to go there Easter, Christmas, several times a year. And when my family decided to sell the property, I was just so heartbroken. And I think I needed to put that, all the memories and everything beautiful about that place, I needed to sort of put it somewhere. So as a writer, I just sort of thought, okay, I think I need to write about this. And so I think what I've tried to capture is just the spirit of that place, and also just the spirit of the nostalgia that you have for a place that you've been visiting for many years, which I think resonates with a lot of Australians because that's the way we holiday. We go to the same caravan park, or we go to the same part of the world, or we I don't know, we sort of have this journey that we take, particularly in summer. And it's been really interesting reading feedback about the book, that's the thing that's resonated with people. And it's funny because when I was writing the book, I didn't realise that that's what I was creating, or that's what would resonate.
As is obvious from my introduction, I've read it and I loved it. But for those who haven't read it yet, can you tell me a little bit more about the story?
It's a bit of a combination of things. It's part mystery, part family drama, and part love story. It revolves around some sisters. Two sisters, Phoebe and Camilla, return to the holiday cottage of their childhood on a beautiful river, and they're haunted by why their third sister, Karen, left a message written in flowers and walked into the river. And so this is the mystery at the heart of the book. And Phoebe is a woman in her late 30s whose life has just completely fallen apart, been so together, and then her boyfriend hasn't proposed, which is what she had expected and hoped for. And she's dealing with the loss of her sister Karen a year before. And so she just flees to this really remote cottage that's been abandoned after Karen's death, because it's really the only place she can feel like she just needs to get away from Sydney, basically. And so we then go back and she's sort of surrounded by all this nostalgia because the family had so many beautiful times there. But at the same time, there's this eeriness because her sister is no longer alive, and the question of what happened to her down there is hanging over the place. It's a real exploration of grief, I think. It's an exploration of going back to a simpler way of existing, the ramifications of that. It's a story about community because she finds a little community there. Her first love, Jez, is living in the house just down the river, a beautiful old house called Driftwood, the namesake of the book, and he's married, and there's this whole little community, almost like a share house living there, and she is embraced into that.
So Karen's suicide the year before is something that haunts Phoebe, as you've mentioned, something she needs to confront when she returns to the cottage. But the emotions and the unanswered questions that Phoebe has about her sister's death are not uncommon for people affected by suicide, are they?
It's such a difficult thing to deal with because there are so many questions left unanswered. Obviously, grief and death in any form is just so overwhelmingly difficult and heartbreaking. But I think with something like suicide, there's an extra level of hurt and confusion and questioning, and did I know that person? Could have I helped them? And then there's this question that's hanging over Phoebe of, well, did she commit suicide? Is that what happened? Because that's not the person that I knew. And so it's actually an exploration in a way of how much do we know someone and how much do we know ourselves. I think that's kind of at the heart of the book as well.
Did you do any research to inform this thread of your story? And if so, what kind of research did you have to do?
Yeah, so with the suicide aspect, I definitely did do research. I have had experience of friends going through the loss of loved ones through suicide, and so I guess I drew a little bit upon that. But I visited a lot of community chat rooms around suicide and just really read about how people deal with all the added layer of heartbreak and questioning. I think it just adds an extra layer of emotion to what people are dealing with. And so I read a lot of personal accounts of what was going through people's minds and their struggle.
So Karen's suicide note was written in flowers, both literally and figuratively, I think it's fair to say, and there was some reference there to the language of flowers. And to that end, this beautiful story had echoes of another book for me, a book by Holly Ringland, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. And I think in this digital age, it's wonderful to reflect on different ways of communicating, something I think Phoebe reflects on too in her time at the cottage.
Oh, I loved that book, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart.
Oh, it's divine.
A really special book. Karen is a florist. I think there's probably, it's fair to say, a bit of a symbol of flowers being really important to the book, as shown by the cover, really. Just that Karen made meaning through flowers, and that was a really big part of the way she communicated love. So she would make bunches of flowers not just according to what they looked like, but according to their meaning. I just thought that was really beautiful, and also I thought that really conveyed the sort of character that Karen is, just quite sensitive and, yeah, just a different way of communicating, because I think we all communicate in different ways.
I love that you've explored different ways of communicating in this book, even with the simple messages passed between Jez and Phoebe at a later stage in the book. You know, just those things that I think this generation are not prone to do.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a huge theme in the book. When I started writing it, I didn't want there to be text messages. I didn't want there to be that digital communication. I wanted it to be off the grid. And also the place that it's actually set doesn't have internet access. And so that was always part of why we loved going there, because our phones didn't work. We literally had to walk up this huge hill to get reception at the top. And so no one could be bothered doing that.
Yeah.
And I just remember that it took a few days for everyone to kind of let go. At first, it's like, oh, I've got to check my email. And then 2 days in, you're just like, nah, I don't need to. And it's going back to, the way things used to be when I was a kid. It's really different because you're more engaged with the people around you. You're more engaged with nature, I think. And so that whole theme of switching off and getting back to a simpler way of existing and appreciating the people around you and nature was really something that I wanted Phoebe to experience, and that is a big part of the change that she goes through as a character, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Just as you were talking, it made me realise I holiday down on the south coast a lot, and like Phoebe, I think you realise that when you're away from all the things that you're used to, it's surprising how little you can survive with.
Yeah, I think so. And I also drew on my experience of backpacking through Europe, where I distinctly remember what it was like to just literally live out of one quite small backpack, and in a way how happy that can make you. I mean, obviously, like, you're exploring the world, so that helps. Just that when push comes to shove, living in a more simple way can actually free you up to experience other things that are less materialistic.
Now, I love the way that you explored the relationship between Phoebe and her sisters, and also Jez and Tommy, the two brothers in the story. And despite life getting in the way for each of them, despite the distance and the passage of time, the sense that they would do anything to protect their siblings was a strong theme throughout this book. Was this something you chose to explore?
Not consciously. I don't have any sisters, sadly. I've just got a brother who I do love dearly. I think the whole sibling, the whole family thing, there's just such a unconditional love there. You know, you can't choose your family, and Phoebe and Karen were very close. They were best friends, but Phoebe and Camilla, there's a lot of tension between them, and they certainly wouldn't be in each other's lives if not for being related. And I think that's something that a lot of people can probably relate to. Not everyone gets on tremendously with their siblings, but at the same time, there's kind of this blood love that does run in families where when push comes to shove, you know, you're going to be there for your family and your siblings. And I think in the book that's something that's really becomes apparent as the book progresses.
Now, the bushfire scenes in this book were so prophetic. Given the bushfire devastation on the south coast last summer, had you experienced anything like this when you spent time there as a child?
No, never. I was in the 1994 bushfires in Sydney, so I remember being locked in my parents' house, and I was a teenager at the time. The ash flying through the air and everything going orange, and beaches filled with burnt leaves and things. So I did have a real memory of the impact of that and living through something similar. But in terms of the South Coast, when I was writing it, I was thinking, gosh, we've never really had fires on the South Coast, and, you know, our property would be quite at risk because it's in the bush and it's very dry and it gets very hot, but we'd never experienced anything like that. And then the book came out in December, and literally just at the same time that it came out, that whole area just burnt. We're still in contact with people on the river, and they were saying, you know, that the fire's coming, and we were hearing all this stuff, and I was just thinking, that's crazy. It's just exactly what I've written in the book. It's just weird how things like that happen sometimes. It's a very Australian book. That's the reality of our summers. We obviously, this last bushfire season has just been like nothing else we've ever had before. I think the book is so much about place, and it's almost like the river and the landscape are characters, and you know, when you are living closer to the land, you are so affected by you know, by the weather and nature, and you're sort of in it. And so I really wanted to convey that. But yeah, it was just strange, the timing of it. I'm hoping that sometime this year I can go down and do something on the South Coast to do with the book, perhaps in the area. It's set, well, the place that our holiday house was just on the Clyde River, just out of Bateman's Bay. So I'm hoping to perhaps go down there and do something in that community. I'm hoping to go and visit and support the locals there, because it's been such a devastating summer for them.
What would you like readers to take away from your book?
I know from when I read a book that I love, I want to get lost in a world. I want to just be taken away from my life and kind of go into something that feels so real and just be immersed in a way. I'd love to be able to create that for a reader, to just really enjoy being in a different place that feels very real. I also wanted to explore themes of grief and what it is to lose someone, because I think everyone has, and just working through that. And there's definitely a bit of a dark thread through the novel. But I also wanted to find some hope as well. I wanted the reader to be left with a real sense of sort of hope and inspiration, I suppose. In terms of what I'd love the reader to take away as well is just that sense of what's really important in life. That's something that Phoebe has to journey through. So she goes from having this amazingly successful job and an incredible partner, and what happens when we actually lose everything? How do we cope with that? What strength can we find in ourselves? What beauty can we still find? So I think, yeah, if readers could somehow be not challenged, but just inspired to think a little bit about that kind of thing, about what's actually really important in life and how to find it, I think that would be a great thing to leave with people.
Well said, Vanessa. And I think in these really uncertain times that we're experiencing now, it's really important, one, for people to be able to escape reality, even if only for a little while, with a beautiful book like yours, but also give people ideas and strategies on how to cope when things seem a little bit overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Moving on from the book a little bit, I wanted to ask you, did you always want to be a writer?
I think I probably did. I mean, I wrote journals from quite a young age, and I wrote a lot of poetry, probably terrible, well, definitely terrible, as a teenager. And yeah, I do remember I loved English from, a very, very young age. I actually remember in year 6 at school, in primary school, I did love writing, but there was this other girl in the class whose surname was King. I think her name was Rebecca King, and she was so incredibly talented at writing, and everyone was always like, "You're like the daughter of Stephen King, Rebecca King." And so I kind of thought, oh, well, I'm nowhere near as good as Rebecca King. I don't think I'll ever be a writer. But then I think by the time I got to high school, I think one English teacher called my mother and she was like, "This is a very, very intense piece that your daughter has written." I'm not quite sure what to make of it. So, yeah, I think I had an inkling that there was something there. And then when I grew up, I was like, right, okay, how am I going to make a living? Well, I can't, write books. That's not very realistic. So I was like, well, I'll be a journalist because, that seems like a profession where you can write. And I have worked as a journalist for many, many years, and that has been an incredible profession. I find it quite a lot harder in a way than writing fictional books because you have to actually just go out there into the world. I mean, I was a cadet on the Daily Telegraph and just, working night shifts and chasing ambulances and covering sick children, and it forces you to just see everything in life. But in hindsight, that's probably a pretty good lesson for a novelist because it just, you're introduced to so many people from so many different walks of life, and you kind of have to really listen to them and find the story and find the best way to tell a story succinctly. I think I probably always did want to be a writer of books, but it was only quite recently that I realised I could actually write one.
So I guess that leads me to find out a little bit about your road to publication. Had you been working on this book for a really long time, or how did it all unfold for you?
This book took quite a while not to write. I think it only took about a year to write. I took a redundancy when a publication that I worked for folded, and I just thought, okay, I've got a big redundancy package. I'm just going to spend 6 months, maybe a year, see how it goes, just giving myself a bit of space to write a book. And I have a really lovely supportive husband, so he was like, go for it. And we just moved house as well, and we'd moved from this tiny unit into a house that actually has a garden, and so I could sit in my office and look out onto green, which was really nice. I just sort of had a real inkling that I wanted to write something about this place of my own childhood holidays, but I just kept getting this image of this girl standing on the end of a jetty, and I was like, what's that about? And so I had a few false starts and it didn't seem right. And then I actually did a writing course, which I would really recommend to people to do something like that, because sometimes it just forces you to get going and to get something down. And I wrote this sort of scene, which ended up being, I think, the third or fourth chapter of the book. And everyone was just like, this is a great scene. And then I realised the girl in the scene was potentially the girl standing on the end of the jetty. And it kind of all just connected up. Then the book came out, but obviously it wasn't as easy as that. Although my husband says to me, you always, you forget how hard it actually was. you really struggled with this. And I'm like, did I?
Selective memory.
Selective memory. And then my agent took quite a long time to read it, and then it took quite a long time to sell it. And so by the time it was published, it was kind of years ago that I'd written it. I think you have to have a lot of patience in the publishing game, and you kind of have to believe in yourself as well, because I mean the amount of times when I just thought, oh, just let it go, it's not going to happen, but then I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and it's like, in a way, it's like your characters are holding you to it. They're going, we deserve to live.
What about us? What about us?
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I've got another book that I'm just signing the contract for now with HarperCollins, that's hopefully coming out in Christmas or early next year. And I mean, when I submitted that, I had the same sort of, oh gosh, is this any good? But the characters kept saying to me, we deserve this. We are good. We are real. And I'm like, listen to your characters, Vanessa.
That's gold.
Hopefully it will be a little bit quicker this time. But yeah, my advice to people that are publishing something for the first time is be patient and just keep writing, write the next thing, which is what I did.
That was going to be my next question.
You do have to believe in yourself, because it's such an airy-fairy thing. Like, what one publisher could not like and reject, another publisher loves. You can't give up. Obviously, if you've got, dozens and dozens of rejections, then you might want to rethink that. But I mean, if you get rejected by an agent or by a publisher or whatever, just keep going, but do listen to the things that people are telling you. I have beta readers, so I have 3 bookish friends who read extensively, who I trust their opinions, and I send my manuscript out to them before I send it to my agent or my editor, and I listen to what they say, particularly if all 3 of them are saying the same thing. Then you're like, okay, this isn't working. But interestingly, you will sometimes get varied advice. One friend will say, I loved this bit. The other one will be like, I'm not sure about this. So when you have that disparity, you go, well, that's probably just the nature of the beast, because then when you publish your book, people will love certain things, people will hate certain things. It's a very strange industry, full of differing opinions.
So Vanessa, if readers wanted to find out about you or find out more about your books, where can they find you?
I'm actually just on Instagram at the moment, just with the handle at Vanessa McCausland. But I think with a new book coming out next year, I'm probably going to have to set up a Facebook and a website as well. So yeah, I'll get those things up sometime in the near future, hopefully.
Fantastic. Vanessa, I wanted to thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today. I was thrilled to have had a chance to meet you recently and also to read your beautiful book.
Well, thank you so much, Claudine, for having me.
Now, listeners, for a chance to win a copy of this unforgettable book, head to my Instagram or Facebook account and follow the prompts to win. Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.